Well, yesterday someone said we need to be humble in the face of nature. Well, that's a bit like the famous quote that democracy is a great idea, someone should try it someday. Our struggle at the moment seems to be between being humble in the face of politics, or humble in the face of economics, or humble in the face of science. But one thing we seem to know, we need to be humble, one way or another. The image of heaven that's painted in the reading from Revelation this morning is a bit reminiscent of a political rally, isn't it? There are crowds and crowds of people all cheering. There is an adored leader who randomly points at people he knows. You see how they do that at the rallies? Everyone is applauding and celebrating. But there are a few significant differences between St. John's picture of heaven and a political rally. The obvious one is the person whom they worship is God and not a mere human. And another difference is that the crowds who have got there have done so through a humbling process, because they've had to accept that their salvation comes through Christ and not their own efforts. Matthew chapter 5 presents us with a roadmap to holiness in which these virtues are extolled. Meekness, mercy, purity of heart, peacemaking, acceptance of suffering for the cause of right. All of these have one thing in common. In modern psychological terms, they are associated with the denial of ego. In other words, being humble. By the way, humble is a much misused word these days. People in the eye of the media will often say, upon being given some accolade, that it was a humbling experience. The right word is usually exalting. It's an exalting experience, not a humbling one. A humbling experience is one that brings us down from our pedestal and reminds us of our weakness, our vulnerability, and our dependence. Which brings us back to where we started. Before whom or what should we be humble? Historians would say history. As Churchill said, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And at least being humbled before history has the benefit of enabling an avoidance of past errors. But the problem with it is, whose history do we humble ourselves before? Politicians, of course, would say politics, but sadly politics is an arena which leads almost inexorably to self-serving activity. Scientists would say science, but that can leave out so much: personal relationships, economics, arts, and so forth. Economists would say economy. Humble yourselves before the economy. But that seems to lead even more inexorably towards corruption than politics. So the question is, how can we be saved? And that is where the faith comes in. All the above attempted answers end up eventually serving humanity, or at least a subset of humanity. Whereas the universal salvation is found only when we become humble before God. And all those crowds of souls imagined in Revelation will be there not as a result of their own self-serving egos, not as a result of their burning ambition, not as a result of their great and humbling works that have brought them to fame, but because they have learnt that giving up self is the only way to holiness. Oh, and by the way, they will be the most surprised to find themselves there.